Everybody, it's me, John Anthony Chihawk, aka the Anti-Hero. Kind of on a roll this weekend. It's Labor Day weekend, making some videos, buying and reading some comics, and I actually just finished this. This is Spider-Man: A Life Story. This is told in 6 parts, written by Chip Zdarsky of Sex Crimes. Is it Sex Crimes? Yeah, Sex Crimes. Fame, and drawn by probably one of the most prolific, arguably one of the most prolific Spider-Man artists of all time in Mark Bagley. Bagley's probably one of my favorite Spider-Man artists, and I know for some people that's blasphemy because you should say Ditko, or you should at the very least say Todd McFarlane. I wasn't really reading comics when McFarlane was drawing Spider-Man. I might have come in at the very, very tail end of it, right before Image was formed. I can't honestly remember what was the exact first Spider-Man book I ever read. It may have been a Larson book. It may have been Spider-Man #1 by McFarlane. I can't honestly remember. The interesting thing about Spider-Man: A Life Story is it's told in decade format. So you're essentially looking at the single biggest event of each decade. And it doesn't necessarily relate to comics in that regard, because the 60s doesn't take place right after Peter was bitten. It takes place when he's in college. And when the Vietnam War is starting up and becoming very prevalent, and Peter decides not to go to Vietnam. And instead, it starts out in the story with Flash Thompson. He's getting ready to deploy to go to Vietnam, and the issue ends very, very strangely, because you think it's gonna continue in issue 2, and it doesn't, and that kind of bothered me. Captain America is being hunted down by a platoon of United States soldiers, and it's very, very difficult to tell if that platoon is being led by Flash Thompson or not. But that question's never answered. We never see those characters again. The 70s rolls around, and we're looking at the fight with Harry Osborn, who's now taken up the mantle of the Green Goblin. As you can see, the disco ball is a pumpkin bomb. Interesting story. It does delve a teeny bit into Clone Saga. It's more revolving around I believe it's the death of Gwen Stacy. It's been 4 or 5 months since I read this book. Number 3 was the 80s, and the 80s was really trippy for me, because what was the biggest event that had to do with Spider-Man anyways? The biggest event that had to do with Spider-Man was the black costume, and also Kraven's Last Hunt. So seeing like a late 30 something or early 40s Peter Parker up in space, like making the costume, and he's starting to get some wrinkles, and he's starting to get some grays, and then Reed Richards comes in, and Reed Richards is an old man. He's like in his 50s, like late 50s, or maybe even 60s, I don't know. But it was very, very strange to see that, and then that's when it really dawned on me, this is being told in his entire life. So like, if he started out in 62, the tail end of 62 at about 15, yeah, he would be over 20 years older than that now. He'd be like 22 years older, because this was like 84 or 88. So he'd be in his late 30s or the beginning of his 40s. So it was trippy to learn that and see that. This was also really, really difficult in conjunction with the 90s, which, of course, the biggest story in Spider-Man's world was the Clone Saga. At least according to like online backlash, most people hated it. Some people liked it. I liked the Scarlet Spider costume. I dug Ben Reilly, the original Scarlet Spider costume. So did my friend Demetrius, my best friend in high school. He loved that costume. So even now, when I find Scarlet Spider stuff, I'm really prone to buy it just for nostalgia purposes. I'll mail it to him. The interesting detail is that the newest Scarlet Spider story, which is not Ben Reilly, takes place in Las Vegas, and Dee lives just outside of Vegas. So like I sent him the first issue, or I gave him the first issue over Thanksgiving one year, and I was just like, dude, he lives in Vegas now. And it's not even the same costume, but at least you get it on the cover. It's kind of cool. So he thought that was kind of funny. But I think one of the real things about the 80s and the 90s for me is seeing the passage of time. We're very, very led to believe that in comic books, like, time doesn't pass, people don't age, injuries heal, things like that. Seeing Peter getting older, seeing Mary Jane leave him, and seeing another really, really key point that I don't want to give away if you haven't read it yet, come to fruition, and it has to do with the Clone Saga. But one of the harder things to see was the death of Aunt May. Now, Aunt May's always been drawn as this old, frail woman. Since Peter was 15 years old, she was drawn like she was in her 70s, 80s, or what have you, which didn't make sense. So every subsequent movie that has kind of de-aged her a little bit, and now we have Marissa Tomei, who's in her 50s, and Peter is a teenager, like late teens, getting ready to go to, like, graduate pretty soon, go to college kind of thing. He essentially, like, we're making it more relatable because my mom was 28 when she had me, which means my aunt and uncles are around that age. So now they're in their late 60s. One is quite a bit younger, so she's in her 50s, but still, like, nobody is like 90 years old and they're just one generation off. All those people are 2 generations off for me. But given the work that I do now, like, for those of you who don't know, I work at Pima Council on Aging. It's the area agency on aging for Pima County in Arizona. It was one of the first real AAAs that was formed to try to advocate for individuals who are getting older, who need resources, who need services, who, need to figure things out for Medicare and Social Security and benefits and things like that. So seeing a story where one of the most pivotal characters in Spider-Man's mythos has dementia, she's old, she's where she's supposed to be based on the timeline. She's wandering, and then she passes. I shouldn't say passes. I want to start using the word dies, because there are certain story elements in books that I'm going to do that I don't want to say passes away, because that there's a weird connotation with that when you say dies, it's final. But it's also nothing to be feared, because it happens to all of us. But seeing that moment when Aunt May dies, and how it affects Peter, and how it rips him apart from Mary Jane and their brand new children, what was really hard for me. And that may have been the reason why, even though part 6 just came out last week, I've had part 5 for over a month now, and I didn't read it until today. Sometimes comic books can be extremely cathartic. They can be extremely freeing. They're an expression of power. They're a release. They're fun. They give you like a moralistic tale, but it doesn't like beat you over the head like other books do. Some books can be kind of triggering. Some books can be kind of hard to read. And that was one of them, seeing Aunt May die. It wasn't through any fault of Peter's. It wasn't because he didn't stop the burglar. It was just time. And that's something that not all of us have. I mean, that's in the famous words of Sandman's little sister, Death. Or I think she's his big sister. You get what everyone gets, a lifetime. That's a hard concept to take, but it's also the truth. And when you think about it, it's also extremely beautiful. So I'm not going to continue with being morose and everything. I'm trying to have a good day, but I want people to like see why comic books mean so much to me. It's passionate. Like it's very much a liberating experience reading some of these stories and seeing what people do and they come up with for tales of these heroes and these villains and these people who honestly are just people. You know, they may have the powers of gods, but they're just people in the end. The 2000s, the two biggest events in history and in Marvel Comics at that point in time was 9/11, at least in history for the United States, and Civil War in Marvel. And by this time, Peter's in his late 50s, and he is forced to come back after Ben Reilly is killed and make a choice. Which brings us to the 2010s. This takes place this year, 2019. Peter is an old man, and he is in his, so this would be 13 years after that, so he's in his late 70s, maybe early 80s at this point. And he is working with one of his, I guess, proteges would be a good point. But the superior Spider-Man story takes place linking to Miles Morales and not Peter Parker. Because Otto wouldn't link to somebody who was just 10 years younger than him or 15 years younger. Like Miles is in his, late teens, early 20s. Because everybody is aging at the same rate. So this would have been 8 years after Miles got his powers. And Miles was like in junior high, I think, when he got his powers. So he would be college age at this point. Maybe having graduated from college already. Probably, most likely, unless he was getting, a doctorate or something like that. The end to this almost brought tears to my eyes. The peace that Peter Parker is able to get in his final moments being a hero, and the moments he gets, speaking to Aunt May one last time, even though it's in a vision, is that everybody has one thing that they're looking for. And the one thing that Peter wants more than anything is to save Uncle Ben. And of course he can't do that because it's already happened. Uncle Ben is dead. He's been dead for decades, and Peter can't change that, so he saves everybody else. And it's a metaphor for like so many things that so many of us do every single day. Spider-Man: A Life Story is possibly one of the best Spider-Man stories I've ever read. I didn't know what to think about the artwork with Bagley doing all the art. I thought maybe they should do a different artist on each decade. Might have been an interesting take as well. But overall, a completely solid book and very, very relevant for today. My name is John Anthony Chihawk Soldero. This has been your review with some spoilers, and I apologize for that, of Spider-Man: A Life Story. It's all out there now. Go to your local comic book shop and pick up the issues. I believe, other than the variants, they're all still cover price, if I remember correctly. So I'll talk to you later. You guys have a great rest of your Labor Day. Relax. If you are working, thank you for still being open and available for those of us who aren't necessarily observing this as a day off. I appreciate it. Later.